Welcome to VR Hermits, a podcast about virtual reality development. I'm Dave Ramsey.
And I'm Joe Simpson. How's it going, Dave?
Doing pretty good, Joe. How are you doing?
I'm doing good.
Did you get anything interesting done this week?
Yeah. Yes and no. Didn't get a lot done this week because I had a bout of sickness of some sort for a couple of days right in the middle of the week. And I did a fair bit of consulting work this week with my FileMaker customers. So that took up a lot of my productivity time, but I did some VR stuff Friday and over the weekend, and went to COG yesterday.
How was it? I missed this meeting.
It was fun. I got to show 8 different people my game, which was cool. Like, I haven't shown anybody aside from like you and 2 other people, and so it was nice to just like walk up to complete strangers and like put this on your face. It's the great thing about the daydream. One of these days I'm going to end up with a trench coat full of HMDs and just like walk up to strangers in airports, like, put this on your face. What?
I saw that in a old sci-fi movie or something, like the guy with all these cords coming out of him running to like his chorus around him, just all these people mentally connected into his world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I could
Joe,
just make
the VR hub.
Well, I can also just, make a snow crash scene and just get people on snow crash. Basically just a static scene. Like, here, you try some snow crash. I'm not much of a drug dealer, so I don't know if that would fly. I never even had a pager.
I used to have a pager.
Were you a drug dealer?
No.
Huh.
But it was before it was reasonable to get a cell phone as a human being.
Okay.
I mean, there was a time that it was just really, really spendy, but pagers were pretty cheap.
Mm-hmm.
You get one for like $20 a month.
My brother had a pager when he was in high school, and he wasn't cool, so I can only assume he sold drugs.
Mm.
It's always been what I've assumed, but I don't know that. So what are you working on?
I'm still working on the book. So I wrapped up chapter 10 after getting stuck last time trying to do that one piece of animation and not being able to figure out how to make it happen. But we resolved that. Did that stay in the show?
Yep.
Okay. Then everybody else heard my confusion as well. So wrapped up chapter 10, which ended up having all the enemies. Again, this is the first-person shooter section of the book. So started making enemies, having them spawn at particular locations, animating their moving around, their attacking, firing rounds, varying levels of damage, and then pickups. So boosts to various kinds of ammo for different guns, and health and armor boosts. And having those spawn at locations, and then like, here's the script that spawns, here's the script that runs the pickup, and then the pickup is informing the player or the gun. I don't know, it was weird. But adding ammunition to things, it was kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
And then adding sound for all of that. So the first game in the book, I mean, it was a lot of new material, but it took 8 chapters. This one's done all of this in 2. They're pretty meaty chapters.
Yeah.
So I've got one more chapter on the first-person shooter, and then I'll be moving into, what was it, the RTS?
I think so. It's just like a bunch of 2D games, or a 2D game.
2D platformers is section 3.
That's the section that I mostly just read over while walking around the park rather than working through.
So at this point, we got introduced to coroutines, which are neat.
The first time I Googled Unity coroutines, the first response I found was somebody on Stack Overflow saying, "Is this really necessary?" I'm like, Hmm. Go on. I've seen them used a couple times. The book that I referenced last week, the Unity 5 by example book, used them a few times in like the second and third games that we made. And I can definitely see how they're handy for certain types of activities that you don't want to be frame dependent. It's a weird concept, but it's really cool what they do.
Well, I mean, the core concept of what you're accomplishing is pretty straightforward to the point that Swift, C Sharp, and even FileMaker basically have the exact same function. It's delay for some period of time and then run this so that I don't have to think about this thing.
But this is happening, 60 or 90 or 140 frames a second. Like that's the cool part. Like FileMaker's not going to do that.
The weird part to me was the structure with the yield call. Because in most of these, what they'll say is, I run a command that says, wait X period of time and then run this function.
Mm-hmm.
But the Unity construct for that is, go ahead and call this function right now. And at the beginning of that function, probably, it's going to say, wait so long and then finish this function. Kind of, sort of, in a separate thread. That's kind of weird.
But you can do the thing you're talking about as well. I came across that in that book. It was called something else, but that same thing of start this in X seconds or X minutes or whatever.
Yeah, there might be some advantages there in kind of in a block sort of way, in that you could sample the settings for the object at the time that the call was made. So you call the function, it records some information, and then drops out and comes back in later.
Mm.
But you already have those items recorded without having to build like secondary data structures or actually supporting something like blocks that would snap all of those settings off when the block was created and then run them that way. I don't know. It still feels weird. What was my line here? I'm not sure it's bad, but it's definitely weird.
Yeah.
I'm also not a huge fan of calling coroutines by name. There's a couple of spaces where they do like call this function, but you hand it a string, which is the name of the function.
Yeah, I've seen more and more of that in recent weeks. I know you're not going to like it, and it's one of those things that I just don't care. Like, whatever. Like, I know you could mess it up, but you could just not mess it up and it'd be fine.
Sure. And like, there's always the option to not mess it up, and that's why we write code that has no bugs. Like, just don't mess it up in the first place, and you never really have to learn how to debug. It's easy.
Well,
one of the things. Go ahead.
Like in FileMaker, there was a time where I got really into the idea of writing abstract code without referencing anything by string, with doing lots of object passing around in FileMaker, a bunch of stuff that's really not native ideas in FileMaker, but it was kind of kludgy workarounds, basically neat developer-y tricks that the customers that I was working for didn't benefit from. And it took me a while to realize just how much kind of busy work I was making for myself with that type of thinking. It was a particular job that I worked at where they had just a very different culture of, the main thing we're doing here is making stuff for other people. We're not making it cool, and we're not making anything that someone who has downloaded FileMaker for the first time can't figure out without a little bit of Googling. So I've just become much more practical. So if Unity or FileMaker or any other environment says we reference by string, I don't go out of my way to make enumerations or anything else to abstract that out. Like, nope, this is how we're doing it. This is how I'll do it. So that's just kind of where I stand with that.
Yeah, prior to learning Swift, I did a fair amount of work with Objective-C. And Objective-C really aggressively uses a message passing idiom and or design pattern. And so the trick is that you can just like, oh, this object here, pass it this message. It doesn't matter if that object knows how to respond to that message, because if the object doesn't know how to respond to that message, it just does nothing. It doesn't even generate an error message. It just keeps on going. And so you can pass it a message and the smallest typo will just not generate any kind of error. Not even at runtime. Your code will just not function the way you want it to. And it was one of the things that I liked about Swift is that Swift has a tendency to turn a lot of things that would be runtime errors in another language into compile time errors. Mm-hmm. Like it wants all those little connections solidly made, definitively created, so that at compile time it can go, nope, this isn't going to work. Which places constraints on you when you're writing it and reduces that ability to kind of go, no, just make it do whatever I want. There was a talk by Will Shipley at one point when he was doing early iOS development, and there was no function for turning the background color of a row to a different color. You couldn't like make the row blue. It was there. It was just that Apple hadn't published it. It was one of the undocumented things. And so Will got around that, at least at the time, by going, so I've got this object. I don't know what it is. I mean, it might be a row, but I really don't know what this thing is. Hey, thing, I'm just going to like ask you to change your color, and maybe it'll work and maybe it won't, but we're not really going to talk about that. And that was cool, and simultaneously a suggestion that maybe something's wrong here.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's after having done a bunch of Swift, and I think part of the reason that I had so little difficulty migrating all of my Swift code to C# was that I had initially written it in Swift. And so I was using the kind of solid typing and such like that in all the Swift things. So when I converted that code mostly line for line to C#, it retained a lot of the advantages of the static typing out of Swift. Part of the reason why I think my C# code worked so well. Because it was almost trivial to do it, complexity-wise. It was just a bunch of work, but it wasn't hard. Anyway, it's just a spot that every time I see that pop up in an example or in the book, I'm like, oh, God. I'm gonna make a constant. I'm gonna define a constant somewhere that's just that string, and then I'm always going to use the constant so that I know that we're always pointing to the same thing, and I've got compile time checking that all of this works. Because I'm gonna mess this up. I know I'm gonna mess this up. I'm dumb like that. I'm going to make this mistake.
Nice.
So that was an interesting one. I also saw a spot. So I think I talked maybe last time about what seems weird to me in Unity's API, where sometimes we're talking about the game object and sometimes we're talking about the transform. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it almost uses those interchangeably.
Yeah, that was a couple weeks ago.
It turns out that one of the properties of a transform is the transform. It's actually .transform.
Nice.
Which gets you the same thing. So the cool part is, if you've got a variable, and you didn't pay any attention to whether it's a transform or a game object, you can just say thingy.transform, and you're going to get the transform.
So it's just transforms all the way down.
Yes.
Nice.
So what was my line here? The transform of the transform is the transform.
I think we got our show title.
And then there's another spot where I'm giving myself confusion when I don't need to. It's just me not quite picking up on the way it works.
That's my job.
Yeah. I keep wanting to use something like self rather than game object.
Yeah.
Like self.transform.
There is a this, but it works on the script, not the game object.
See, you stomped all over my punchline.
Ah. Go on.
It's like, yes, there's this. It's just not going to work the way I want it to. So yeah, I keep wanting to use self, and it's getting me the script. Never mind.
That's very selfish.
Oh, the alternate show title. Jerk. So yeah, that was my fun with chapter 10.
Cool. So, do you want to talk about your other idea?
So, as I'm digging into this, I'm also realizing, how much Unity does for me and how little code it's going to take to do some of the things that I want to accomplish.
Mm-hmm.
But simultaneously, I'm also realizing that I need to go simpler. Like, for my first thing, let's go for a simpler project and a simpler project and a simpler project until I get to something that I can really pop out and do the complete curve, the entire arc of game development from beginning to end, and see how all of that flows in Unity before I start trying to do something more complicated. And so there was an old idea that I'd had for an Apple TV game that involves it's a 2D platformer where you're being chased by clowns.
Nice.
And it's really pretty simple. I think it's got some fun mechanics in it. And the thing was, at the time I was going to do it in SpriteKit. I wanted to target the Apple TV. But targeting the Apple TV now is silly. But with Unity, I'm not entirely sure I have to care all that much about what I'm targeting. And so maybe I can actually just pump this thing out.
Yeah.
And see how it works. See the entire arc with this simpler game. It's also a topic that I've discussed with some family members a couple of times, was this idea. And so with the holidays coming up, if I can get through another couple of sections of the book and then just kind of whip up a prototype of this, I can demo it with people who have already had the idea in their head and then see kind of what the feedback is like before digging into something more elaborate. Mm-hmm. So even though this is a podcast about VR game development, I may actually spend a little bit of time making a not VR game. And I hope everybody will forgive me.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's fine. I think the idea of going through the entire process of making a game is valuable regardless of whether or not it's VR or AR or 2D or 3D or even a board game or even making a paperclips game. Just going through the entire kind of creative process. I mean, that's what I went through in a simplified version with Random Arrow. It's been almost a year since I published that on the Apple Store, and still like 10 of people have bought it. And so not a successful project in any monetary means, but it was enough to teach me that I liked this kind of work as opposed to spending the next 20 years making databases. But it was also enough to, like, looking on it now, it was interesting that I was able to ship anything, not knowing anything about the game design process.
Well, and here's the cool part. Now it's back catalog.
Mm-hmm.
So when your big cool game comes out and hits it really big, everybody's going to go back and say that they were one of those 10 people who bought Random Arrow.
I know 9 of them, so only one person gets to be the mystery one. There's one person that I don't know that bought the game, and they left a review.
But thousands of people can claim to be that person.
Mm-hmm.
And will.
And they'll get the golden ticket.
Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of my plan. Do a few more sections in the book, and then pop in and kind of try and whip something out for the holidays. It's already November, so probably not by Thanksgiving, but hopefully by Christmas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like the idea of just getting a prototype, like get the core game loop, see if it's fun, use primitive assets. Are you thinking about doing this in 2D or 3D?
Probably 2D.
2D, okay. So you haven't done anything with the sprite stuff in Unity yet, but that's next in the book. And it's some neat stuff. It does feel like you should check for an update in the book, see if they've updated it already, because Unity 2017.2 came out since we got that book, and they just brought a bunch new tools with just in the 2D portion of Unity that weren't there before. And there's some of the stuff from that Unite Austin conference that was a heavy focus. They had a lot of sessions on that, and a lot of those are showing up on YouTube, so you may want to reference some of that. But I'm interested to see if they updated that book. Yeah, that's a ton of stuff to check into. I mean, what I saw just looked really cool. Basically, like painting a sprite map the same way that you paint a landscape with materials. Just like, okay, I'm gonna make this entire scene. I'm just gonna attach this texture to the brush and start painting the background. And okay, now I need some floor. Let's put some blocks in. Like, it was really cool design process, and it's a lot like SpriteKit. I'm surprised that Unity was adding this stuff in 2017 that SpriteKit's had for as long as it's existed.
Well, I think part of that is that Unity's been trying to figure out how to stair step down into 2D.
Yeah.
Because they started with full 3D and all of that, and then everybody went, well, can't you simplify this a little bit? And so they've been trying to kind of boil it down and strip away the excess in my brain Z layer, but people are weird sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it looks like the book is still saying 2017.1 is what it's done from, so they haven't released an update yet.
Okay.
But I wouldn't anticipate that that's going to be all that long.
Yeah.
I don't know that it'll just be days, though.
Yeah, they're pretty good about updating their stuff. I'd be surprised if they do an update every version of Unity or Unreal, because they move pretty fast. They probably do every 6 months or a year for those books, because it would get pretty tiresome to ship a new book every 2 months.
Yeah, do you remember what it was before 2017.1?
It was
maybe
5.6.
Okay. So they've got a release history there, and they did Unity 5.5, Unity 5.6, and Unity 2017.1.
Nice.
So, not each little patch, but each substantive version. It looks like they've been doing an update.
Wow. It's a lot of work.
Why, yes, it is.
You should get really good at this stuff. They're always calling for additional writers and teachers. They've been calling for some VR people recently, which I've retweeted some of that stuff. So, dear listener, if you are good at this stuff, unlike us, you should think about writing some tutorials on the Ray Wenderlich site.
Cool. So I've got some other stuff that I can chat about, but that's mostly, end of show filler. What do you got going on?
So, like I mentioned at the top of the show, I went to COG yesterday, the Central Ohio Game Dev Group, and it was a good meeting. I think I was there. You know how when you and I go, at some point you kind of go, all right, we're leaving. Come on. You weren't there to do that, so I was there until 5:30.
I was gonna say, for reference, there's never any argument from Joe.
No, I need some kind of outside influence to tell me to stop talking.
Okay.
Apparently, it's the only time that I get chatty is at these types of meetups.
I get less chatty at these kinds of meetups.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You get more chatty at Cough Mug, though.
A little bit. Smaller group. Anyway, so you were talking about the COG meeting.
Yeah. So there was a really good presentation about prototyping by the guy who is working on the Dogs at Work game. I forget the title of his game, but that's his company's name. He makes a lot of games that have to do with dogs because he's got a really great dog. And he likes dogs. And who doesn't like dogs? But he did a really good talk on prototyping and walked through several examples over the years of versions of his games that were just like the blocked out prototyping. Like, is this going to be fun? And then if it is, do this. And he walked through a couple of examples of like, I was going to do this, but this part wasn't fun, so I gave up on the entire project. Or, I had my idea list to do this feature, but then I shipped the game without it, and I only sold X number of copies, and I would have wasted 6 months of my life on that feature and still not sold anymore. So, just kind of learning those types of lessons. So that was probably the star of the show for me anyway, just all the prototyping stuff. And then after the presentations, I got to show off my VR game / experience / one guy called it a toy, which is probably a good description. It's not so much a game because there's not really an objective, it's just something to play with. So I might kind of consider that when I start working on marketing copy, that is an experience or a toy. And yeah, I got some feedback from it. Everybody liked it. That was, nobody scoffed at it or told me to get out of here. Everyone immediately thought, of course you're doing this. Why wouldn't you make this? Why isn't this out there already? Which is the only reason I haven't really talked about the idea on the show, because whenever I ship this thing, it will become incredibly obvious what I've been working on, and everybody will smack themselves on the forehead and say, why didn't I ship that? I could have done that in 2 days. It took Joe 2 months or 3 months or 4 months or however long.
Months.
Yes.
Months and months.
Months and months. So yeah, it was cool to get some feedback. It just felt really good to show people what I've been working on. Mostly just sitting in my apartment by myself all day for a month and a half, working on this by myself, and it felt good to just show some other people and get some feedback. And I didn't even show any of the versions with AI. I showed just the placeholder Paul version, where I'm using nav meshes and just really dumb behavior. And even that was fun enough for people to get the idea and start giving me ideas, giving me things to try, things like that. So got a ton of notes, a ton of things to implement. And one of the guys, I was talking through some of the challenges I was having with AI and pathfinding and navigation, and he turned me on to the idea there's a component and a system in Unity's navigation called off-mesh nav links, and they're a way to join multiple navigation meshes together, either dynamically or you can do it through the component system. And you can basically, those links can be defined of allow jumping between there, or falling off of a building, or stepping off a curb or stairs, things like that. So I think that's going to be one of the things that I've been stuck on, is how do I avoid an object on one nav mesh, but also have a nav mesh on top of that avoided object and climb up on top of that thing. And I think I can do that with this tool. And yeah, I got some experimenting to do. I started playing around with it today. For some reason, I can't get a navigation mesh to build on any of my furniture in apartment 304. I can throw a Unity cube in the scene and add a mesh to that, or nav mesh to that, and it's fine. But for some reason, they're not showing up on any of the furniture, and I'm not sure why that is. I thought maybe they were just too small, so I tried adjusting the voxels of the nav mesh, and that didn't do anything. I tried making great big furniture and adding a nav mesh to it. That didn't help. So yeah, I got some troubleshooting to do there. But yeah, COG was, pretty valuable. Uh, Um, you know, just a good time to go. There was some announcements they made. If you're in the Columbus area or Central Ohio area, the some of the multivarious and some of the other educators um, in the game dev space around here are putting together some courses at the Columbus Idea Foundry. You can go to the Columbus Idea Foundry website and find out more there. But they're doing a Unity course and a Maya 3D modeling course. And I think each of the courses are 2 hours, $75 to attend. Bring a laptop if you don't have one; they can provide one. And I think the Unity one is really, just make your first game type of course. Learn how to move around the editor, that type of stuff. But it's definitely worth checking out if you've been thinking about getting into Unity. And I'd like to see them be successful with these courses and start teaching on a wide array of topics. And so yeah, check that out. So my other topic is I told Dave to avoid my Twitter feed over the weekend. And then
I haven't seen the Twitter feed.
You
I
haven't
don't have any idea what you're about to talk about.
Okay. So the bad news is I'm not buying your dev kit.
Okay.
So the good news is go ahead and open that folder that I sent you. Should be a bunch of images in there. Reacting to images is prime podcast material.
Okay, so living room. I see the Vive plugged in and kind of hung on the wall. And there's a little MSI box next to your TV.
So I got a new PC, and I know all of the real nerds out there are going to scoff at the fact that I bought a pre-built PC, but I just don't have it in me to build one. So after scouring the internet and reading tons of reviews and watching videos, this was pretty much the best I could come up with in my price point. And hardware-wise, it's fine. This is not a workstation. This is not a pro workstation by any means. This is a gaming PC that's meant to run VR in my case. So I'm not going to be, putting a Xeon chip in this anytime soon and using it to render 8K video, stuff like that. But the main reason this exists is because as much as interesting as I find Maya and things like it, I really don't ever want to use them if I don't have to. And I'm working in VR on VR games and experiences, and I'd rather work in VR as much as possible. And we've talked a lot about Google Blocks on the show and a couple other tools. So I really wanted to get back into an environment where I can be working in VR as much as possible. And it is kind of silly to be spending all day working on assets in the Vive and then export them and then throw them into Unity and put them onto a Daydream headset. But that's kind of what I'm doing for now. So I'm still, the project is still staying the same. I'm still working on the same project, but using blocks and a couple other tools to make 3D content, and also I started playing around with a couple of games or experiences to make music as well. So I spent a little bit of time over the weekend in blocks, and it's really cool. I really like how they laid out the controls in it. They're iterating on it pretty quickly and adding features. The downside to it, at least for me, from what I've found out so far, and I might just be missing stuff, but I haven't found any like snapping tools, and I don't have a steady enough hand to do any kind of precision work in it. So I'll throw a link in the show notes, but I made a really bad chair and uploaded that to the Poly site. It's just a low poly chair, and it's, one leg is bent and one leg is longer than the others, and yeah, it's just kind of a mess.
So, for those following at home, can I tell them what this is?
Sure.
This is an MSI Trident 3 Mystic Light. Is that just a color?
Yeah, it's the Arctic edition with the GTX 9 or 1070 in it, and a recent KB Lake chip.
Okay. Can I ask what this set you back?
1,500.
Okay.
And I did, just to force whatever nerd credit gets me, which probably isn't any, I did price out the same components on PC Part Picker, and it was only $200 cheaper. Like, well, my time isn't worth that. So
yeah,
I'll just get it.
No, I built my own, and it was a wonderfully horrible experience, and I'm happy for the geek cred, and I will probably never, ever do it again.
Nice. It was really nice I got this thing Friday evening. I think it came at 6:30, and by 7:15 I was in VR. And the longest portion of that was just turning it on the first time. Windows is like, hey, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to install some updates. Like, I know you are.
Come back in an hour.
Yeah. And it even says on the screen, this is going to take a while. At least they're being honest. So yeah, got it all set up. I'm not really working on it. It's mainly just a VR machine. And I've got a mouse and keyboard out there. It's hooked up to the TV right now, so there's no monitor on it. So I really like that. So when I have people over to try VR, we can just watch them on the TV rather than looking at a tiny viewport on the laptop or something. But obviously a TV is not a monitor, and you don't see the refresh rates that you're used to on a good quality monitor. So there's that. As far like when I was installing software on it and downloading stuff from Steam, I remoted onto it. I tried a couple different ways, and I'm hoping you can provide some better options. At one point, I listened back to an episode of our previous podcast to see what you had to say about Microsoft's access for remote desktop on Windows Home. You had a nice rant there that informed me what I needed to know. So the first thing I tried was Google actually has a Chrome remote desktop tool that I guess it technically works. It was just kind of meh. Like it's good for, I need to log into my machine and shut this server down for some reason. That type of thing. It's a good damage control tool, but it was not. It wasn't good enough for me to do any work on. Mm-hmm. The next thing I tried was Forgettable, obviously, because I already forgot the name of it. And that was pretty much the same thing. What was that? Real VNC. And it was just a real low fidelity experience. What I'm using now is a trial to TeamViewer, and this was the only thing that I found so far that actually lets me do the remote session over the LAN rather than go out onto the WAN and back.
Oh, geez. Okay.
So I can do everything over the LAN. It doesn't have the graphical fidelity that I want, but it's super snappy. Like there's no latency in me moving the mouse around or typing, anything like that. So it's completely usable. I wouldn't do any artwork on it, or, if I was going to design a FileMaker layout on it, if I already had the theme made and all the colors picked out, then this would be fine. But I wouldn't pick colors out with this type of connection. So I'm interested if you've come across any better ideas of how can I remote onto a machine locally. Basically, I want the VMware or the Parallels experience, but without the virtual machine part. I just want the machine part.
I haven't played with it further. I've been so pleased with running VMs for most of my Windows work that I haven't needed it.
Okay.
So I haven't looked further.
Yeah. So I think TeamViewer is fine for now. If anybody's listening and has any better ideas, let me know on Twitter. I'm happy to check out other stuff. The only reason I would even want to work on it remotely as opposed to just do VR stuff on there is there's a tool I'm using called Verto Studio VR. Verto Studio is a suite of software. They've got a Mac app, they've got an iOS app, which you may want to check out with your fancy iPad. And it's a 3D modeling software. It's much easier to understand than Maya, but they have a VR version that's much more sophisticated than Blocks. Now, here's the coolest thing that I've seen so far. Their VR version allows you to edit in VR and on the Windows version at the same time. So you could pop out of the headset and make changes on the desktop, or you could have one person on the desktop and one person in VR working on the same scene together.
Ooh.
Yeah, really cool stuff. I've spent a couple hours in it today, and I think that's the biggest endorsement I can give to it. I spent a couple minutes in Blocks, and I spent about 2.5 hours in Verto Studio today. Like just immediately getting into it and running up against okay, I don't know how to do this. I'll try something else, things like that. But yeah, it was just a lot of fun. I made some more really bad chairs, and yeah, it's a fun little tool. It exports as OBJ files, which is the format that Unreal Engine uses in quite a lot of other programs. So it seems like there's OBJ and FBX are like the competing file formats in these industries, and everybody supports kind of importing both, but not everybody supports exporting both. This tool can import either, but it can only export OBJ, and they may add FBX at some point. The only reason that's even notable is Unity works with FBX files, and it can import FBX files a little bit cleaner than OBJ files. Like it can maintain the materials and textures and stuff like that, where it can kind of do the same thing with OBJ files, but you can't really import them in the same way. You have to just drag them in and hope. And yeah, so whatever I make in these tools, but both Blocks and Verto will have that OBJ file format. I'll have to drag each asset in, make sure the material is attached, do some scaling with the import tools, apply any smoothing, stuff like that, and then make a prefab out of that. So there'll be a couple of steps, and I checked the asset store. I haven't tried any of these, but there are some tools to kind of help automate these processes, or to basically set kind of recipes, okay, I'm working in this recipe of import, so whenever I import anything during this process, these are the settings I want to apply to those. So I can look at getting some of those, but for now, I think it's definitely worth the payoff. Just being able to be in the scene, working in 3D assets. I felt like as I'm learning Maya, I feel like I'm learning a legacy skill. It's not a legacy skill yet, and it's going to be years before, working on a desktop doing 3D modeling seems weird. But I think eventually that will seem weird. Like, why would you want to work on a 2D screen to make 3D assets?
Yeah, I'm going to check out this Verto Studio 3D iPad thing. I was just looking at that, and that looks pretty neat. Mm-hmm. There's somebody suggesting here that you can do it on the iPad and in VR at the same time. That it doesn't have to be with Windows or whatever.
Oh, really?
Yeah. That's just a suggestion in a customer review, but yeah, one person's sitting there with the iPad, with the pencil or whatever like that, and then the other person in VR. Could be kind of cool if I had two people who knew anything about 3D modeling.
Yeah.
There's also a relatively inexpensive Mac app called the Verto Shader Editor. Mm-hmm. That is a thing for playing with shaders.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I looked at this tool. I looked at 6 or 7 of them on Steam. I apologize for the background noise, dear listener. There's a thunderstorm happening in Central Ohio right now. It did not see the podcast recording on the schedule and decided to show up anyway. But yeah, this company, they've made a lot of tools, and I can do texture mapping for the 3D models in these tools. I can make the textures and do the shaders, and yeah, it's just kind of a one-stop shop, as opposed to, okay, start this in Maya and then export the UVs out to Photoshop and then do a bunch of mumbo jumbo and then put it back in Maya and make a shader and then import that into Unity and hope the shader turns into a material and then watch Unity crash because I forgot to delete the history in Maya. Like, I can just not deal with any of that and use these much more simple tools. And obviously, I'm never going to be able to do the things that Maya can do, but I'm not doing those things. I'm doing low poly stuff.
Right.
So I think these suit me really well. For now, obviously I haven't used them enough to know that these are going to be long-term solutions. And there's some risk to using tools like this. Like, I don't think Blocks is going anywhere anytime soon, but Google does have a history of, okay, we're done with this now. Like, but we like that. That was, but so yeah, it's not without risk. So there are two other tools that I started playing around with, and these are for music creation. I am not much of a musician. I played the trombone in middle school. I played in the high school marching band because I was super cool, otherwise known as me and my friend Jonathan were the only trombone players in the school district, and they needed somebody on the field. But I really just went to marching band for the girls, so I don't remember too much about the music. But I like the idea of making my own game music, or at least background music and sound effects. So I wanted to see what I can do in VR. And there are two apps, one called Soundstage and one called Lyra. There's quite a few others, but these are the two I've checked out so far. Soundstage is, I think, kind of the cooler version of the two, where you can it's almost like a blueprint system for music, where you can just drag in elements, instruments, notes, rhythms, things like that, and connect them together as nodes over time. And I barely scratched the surface with it, other than just like making some pretty obnoxious sounds for a while. I think it has a steeper learning curve, and I invited a friend of mine who is a musician over, like, hey, come over for some really fun VR gaming. And by the way, you're going to teach me how to do this while you're here.
Here, try this thing that I don't understand.
Exactly. The other one is Lyra, and this looks like it was in the Vive X accelerator program. So it looks like it has some Vive backing. And it is a really cool, it's much more abstract system where you basically have these little crystals. Each one has a little sound effect, and you can connect them together. You can, take this crystal that's like a certain synthesizer sound and attach it to a keyboard real quick and pick which note you want to attach to it, and then add that to the chain. And it's basically just drawing these lines and linking them together, and you can import. There's a huge content library of samples and things like that, and I couldn't immediately make anything useful, but I started looking in the library at some of the examples, and it was just blown away by what you can do both with sound and visually. It's just really, really cool. I haven't actually checked that tool to see, can I export music from this? That's kind of a big deal, but I played with that last night and I was pretty impressed with it. Like, they even, at one point, they had a Jingle Bells scene, and there's a Christmas tree, and the shape of the Christmas tree plays Jingle Bells. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
Okay, now I'm gonna have to check these out.
Mm-hmm.
Jerk.
Yeah. So the last tool that I haven't checked out yet, I'm not sure if I'm going to in this project. It's probably not worth it, but it's the Unity Editor VR, where you can do a lot of level design in VR in the Unity Editor. And the only reason I say it may not be worth it is because I'm working in such a small scene, and I kind of already figured out where everything is going to go. Now I just need to put the right assets there. But I think in the next project, if I have a much bigger environment, I would love to get at the point where most of my work is spent in VR, either in the Vive or one of the Windows mixed reality headsets. they're even adding desktop support, so I could be sitting there in Visual Studio and typing code and flipping back over to Unity and then jump into the Unity editor VR mode. And yeah, I think it's pretty cool. A pretty cool future is on the horizon.
So is Editor VR officially released?
It is.
Or is it still in the kind of sort of officially released section?
It's a thing you can use. It's not in Unity. It's on GitHub as a separate thing. Yeah, they've got for whatever reason, they've gone that route for now.
Okay. Well, it may just not be ready to be a checkbox in the app.
Yeah, something like that. So yeah, these are
way back like 5 topics ago, because you've been kind of on a roll. I didn't want to get in your way. You were talking about having your VR set up so that it would output to the Vive and then to the widescreen TV right next to it. And I've got mine set up the same way, but I've been continuously having a problem where I would really like my audio to come out both from the headset and from the television. Because if I'm watching somebody on VR, I can see what they're seeing, but I can't hear what they're hearing.
So I've always just switched the audio to the computer or the TV. I'm
right,
not sure
because you're a thought criminal, and that's okay, I get it.
Yeah.
That's not the way that works.
I wonder if there's a way to set up sound profiles like there is in macOS. So in macOS, like the MIDI controller app, you can set up like groups of audio devices to serve as outputs or inputs. I wonder if there's the same type of thing in Windows. It's worth looking into.
I'd spent a while in blog posts and things like that, and apparently some people have gotten it to work, but it's a pain in the tail for everybody, and most people haven't gotten it to work, but I last looked at it 6-8 months ago.
Yeah.
So if you were setting it up new, I didn't know if you'd bumped into it. I mean, the software's revved a dozen times since I last messed with it.
Yeah, I'll have to check into it, because it would be nice to be able to leave the positional audio on for the person in VR, but still be able to hear just regular audio. Or in your case, you've got surround sound, so I wonder how that would work.
I'm not even worried about getting to surround sound. I mean, honestly, if it can just come out of the TV speakers, I'll be okay.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it should be possible.
Oh, it certainly should be possible. I just don't understand why it doesn't work.
Yeah.
But I think it's one of those spots where the software is just not quite up there yet, or at least wasn't last time I looked. I don't know. We shall see.
Mm-hmm.
I've actually got a buddy coming into town sometime in the next couple of months who's a big audiophile, music creator, DJ type. And so I'm going to dig into Lyra and Soundstage and see what that stuff looks like. Now that I've got my deluxe audio strap set up.
Yeah, what do you think?
I like it. I like it quite a bit. I don't know that I hate the non-deluxe audio strap as much as you do.
It felt like a face lobster.
I've got a very large head, and so I'm used to head things not fitting at all, and the standard strap actually worked relatively well for me. I could adjust it in the right ways, and suddenly, boom, it works. And it sits pretty well on my head, and that's okay. The deluxe audio strap is definitely better. It is absolutely deluxe. But I don't know that the other one is just horribly unusable and should be removed from the box entirely. So yeah, I like it. It's great. It's worth the $100. I just don't completely hate the old one.
Yeah.
And then I immediately hopped into my current favorite VR game and played Quiver.
Nice.
And I hadn't touched it for a couple of months. And boy, has it changed. The game's under heavy development. And so there's just stuff moving around all over the place. And then they had Halloween adjustments. So there's goblins running around with pumpkin heads and things. And it was just all very, very messy.
Nice.
But still arrow shooting goodness.
Yeah, I have that. I have to pop back into it and check it out. I just remember the couple of times I tried it, I felt like I had gotten so used to the way that Trickster does the archery mechanic that they were just different enough that I was just missing everything in Quiver.
When did you last play Trickster?
Last summer. So it's been 2 months of vibe-free lifestyle, and it felt really good to get back into 6 Degrees of Freedom, tracked motion controllers. Like, oh yeah, this. I did play a game last night, or an experience. It's just, if you have a Vive or an Oculus, just give the developers $2 because they deserve it. It's it's $1 or $2 on Steam, and it's I think it's Kitten Rescue VR, and it's kind of it's kind of like Richie's Flank Experience, only you have to rescue a kitten, and it's there's just 3 short experiences, and the first one's kind of scary, and the second one's like, oh, there's no way I'm doing that, and the third one I almost died. If I hadn't seen the Chaperone Bounds, I would have died. That's the only thing that kept me alive. It was terrifying.
Rescuing a kitten.
Yeah, it was pretty awesome.
This video is unavailable. Well, jerks.
So yeah, the last thing I want to say is why I chose to get a PC for the living room instead of the dev kit, or try to get a Mac running VR. And it's just, I spent a lot of time with the last VR workstation trying to get a way to have an office and a VR space and have those be compatible. And it just isn't with the place that I live. My office is just too small for good room scale VR. And my living room as an office was just kind of throwing off the rest of my life. So I went with a machine that could kind of integrate with my living room in a non-offensive way. I didn't have to move any furniture, didn't have to make any changes to anything. It's just, plop the PC down, hook up the Vive, put the sensors in the corners, and we're done. Now I've got decent-sized room-scale VR without running into a $3,000 computer or anything like that. And it's kind of the best of both worlds. It's nice to be able to go out there, have a nice big area to work in VR for an hour, to save the assets out to Google Drive, come in the office, start loading things into Unity and dropping them into the scenes and making prefabs and stuff like that. It's a cool workflow to kind of bounce back and forth.
Awesome. That's our show for today. You can follow us on Twitter. I'm VRHermit_Dave.
And I'm VRHermit_Joe. And if you get the opportunity, please leave us a review on iTunes, or like us on Overcast or Pocket Cast, or your podcast player of choice. Thanks for listening.